So now we're going to tackle what kinds of ads can we measure with brand lift. And again, this is important because there are several different types of ads. And especially when it comes to podcasting, there are multiple different types of ads. The space has changed dynamically a lot in the last number of years. So I want to make sure you come away with a sense for what can be measured. And it also, how we do it has implications for the studies and what the results mean. Now, I am going to do a little TLDR, which is we can measure any kind of ad, but let's get a little bit more into it. We can basically put digital audio ads into two buckets. On the one bucket, we have streaming and DAI podcasts, dynamic ad insertion podcasts. And on the other side, we basically have podcasts with baked in ads. So let's start and kind of pull this apart a little bit, right? And I put streaming and DAI together because they both use ad tech to insert the ads on demand to the stream or the podcast download. And for podcasts, though, it can be any kind of ad, host read, announcer read, or pre-produced. And this also includes programmatic, which we can measure. So that's important to recognize as well, as programmatic is becoming increasingly popular in podcasts. So getting into measurement methodologies, right? Because this is important to understand that there are different ways of doing this. Let's look at streaming and DAI podcasts, dynamically ad inserted ads. And I really need to emphasize, because often there's confusion here in the marketplace, is that you can dynamically insert any kind of ad creative into a podcast. Host read, announcer reads, pre-produced. It doesn't matter what the ad creative is, it's how it's delivered. So let's get into how we measure it then. For streaming and DAI ads, we use a methodology called live or tagged exposure. So what this means is that when an ad is delivered to a person and they hear it, on the ad tech side, they're able to use something called a tag that allows us on the survey end to help identify the listener and then follow up and let them opt in to taking a survey about what they heard. We call this our exposed cell, right? These are the folks we know heard the ad. Because we know who heard the ad, we can also very easily develop a cell, a group of listeners, of podcast or streaming listeners, who didn't hear the ad, and they function as our control. Now, there's some great advantages to this methodology, right? Because we're getting folks as part of their everyday, regular listening. It's an organic in-market understanding of the ad campaign's impact. And in particular, with podcasts, this means there's a pretty good likelihood that the survey respondents are fans, right? Are regular listeners to that show, regular fans of the host, which means you're getting part of that kind of, content and host affinity as part of the read. There are some limitations, though. There is a minimum campaign size. I can't tell you right now definitively what it is. It does depend a lot on sort of your target audience and the overall reach of the campaign, but there are limitations there. And sometimes a campaign is frankly just too small or has too narrow of an audience to be able to measure with this particular methodology. It must be DAI if it's podcast, and it has to be conducted, the study, while the campaign is live. You can't go a week afterwards and say, oh, I wish we'd run a study. You won't be able to do it. It's only while the campaign is live and in market. So let's look at a quick case study. Here at Signal Hill, we measured with brand lift a campaign for an auto manufacturer, right? And in particular, this campaign was about promoting a newly updated model. And they're really trying to focus on those kind of mid-funnel measures. And what we found in this study is that we saw a 46% lift in consideration for this new model, right? This means that there were 46% more listeners who heard the ad as part of their everyday listening, said, hey, I heard that ad in my podcast. More of them said they would consider that model compared to the control group, people who did not hear that ad.